Welcome, everybody. If you would, while we're waiting for everybody to join us, put your name, company in chat. That would be great. I am Barbara Bale, and I'm the Vice President of HRSF, and we're so excited to have you here today. This is going to be an amazing program, and we've got amazing panelists who are going to tell amazing stories. Um, and I'm really excited about today. So, again, in chat, if you would put your name and what organization you're from, your email address, and then we'd like you to rename yourself. If you're an internal to a company, put an I before your name. And if you're external as in a consultant, put an E before your name. And that allows us when we do our breakouts to have a good mix of internal and external people. Um, and James, do you want to tell us how to do that again?
Yes. So if you place your cursor on your picture on you find three dots in the upper right-hand corner. Click on that. Down towards the bottom, it says rename. And you just click on that rename. And then you get to edit your name. And just for as E's for externals, I's for internals. And it helps if you put a space, a hyphen, and a space, and it separates your name. It's easier to find things. People can see you. Thank you.
So for those who see B in front of my name, I'm a board member, and our board members will identify themselves by putting a B there. And if you see a P in front of someone's name, like Ann Foreman, she's our moderator for today, our presenter. And everybody else should be an E or an I. Great, I see a lot of people doing that. Thank you very much. That really helps. And I think I'll get started as we continue to admit people to the organ. So let me start, James. You want to bring up the first slide? I'm going to start by telling you a little bit about HRSF. If you haven't been with us before, welcome. And if you're a return person and member, even better, welcome. I just want to talk a little bit about HRSF before we go into the content of today's program. HRSF is a professional organization. It's been around now for 31 years. Really providing focus on community, great content, and meaningful conversations. And I think what distinguishes us from other professional HR organizations is we're focused on strategic content, that we make time for conversations with each other, because that's where we learn and grow and make connections. And community is the third piece, which is really important. So all of our programs have an opportunity to break out and with your peers and really talk about how you're connected to the material that you're hearing and what you might do about it and what you are already doing about it. So it's about learning from each other in addition to the experts that may be on our panel. Okay, so next slide, James. We also, as part of HRSF, started a couple years ago, CPO circles. These are informal evening dinners that CPOs get together and talk about whatever is on their minds. So if you're interested in joining these circles, please send a message to me and we'll connect you with the right people for the right circles that we're building. Right now we have 2 CPO circles. It's about 10 people, 10 to 15 people who meet every other month or so. And it's a great opportunity to build that network of support. We all know that HR can be a very lonely place, and this is a great community. Next slide, James. I want to take this opportunity to thank our sponsors who really help support our organization. And you can see our sponsors here. Many of them are represented today. And we're going to hear from one of them about their organization and why they've chosen to support HRSF. And that's PeerPoint. Next slide. Oh, before we do that, I'd like to, again, encourage you to put your name, organization, role, and email if possible in chat. And also answer the question, what brings you to the topic today of insights to impact? And what's relevant about that topic for you? And this will help inform our speakers about how to address your concerns. So again, please include in chat. We'll be monitoring it. And thank you for participating. Okay, now I think it's my pleasure to introduce Alyssa Terrazzano from PeerPoint, who will tell us about her organization. Alyssa?
Thank you, Barbara. Hi. Hi, everyone. Good morning. I'm Alyssa Terrazzano, and I am the CEO of PeerPoint. I'm based in San Jose, California, and I spent 30 years as an HR practitioner. My goal was to be a CPO. So I've held many roles from recruiting to compensation, benefits, HR business partner, also was a head of HR at a medical device company. And PeerPoint's been around for just as long, and it was a company that I was part of starting up many years ago, but I didn't run it because I always had that HR love. And 5 years ago, I took over PeerPoint, rebranded it, and so what we are is a talent acquisition company. So what we offer is mostly RPO, executive search and staffing, anything that has to do with talent, finding the right talent anywhere in the world, the hard to fill, or when you need to hire a lot of people when you are starting up a site. And how we're different is that we work in a more very flexible arrangement. There's like no long-term contract you have to sign for 5 years. We really try to understand your goals, what you're trying to do, and make recommendations, whether it's technology or resources or job advertising, to make it all work using the best of your company and employer brand and our expertise. So I've been very fortunate to be asked to sponsor the HR Strategy Forum because I love the HR community. I work with Matt Pepe he was my client, and so if anyone wants to know, you can call Matt and what he thinks. But he asked me to join, and I love the HR community. So I love the mission of what you do, which is the impact of the workforce. Barbara mentioned community. What the HR Strategy Forum does is think about the future and is planning for the workforce in an intentional way, as well as the company culture. I love that, and really supporting other leaders in our industry and our people that we support in the organization. So I'm really glad to be a part of it. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Alyssa.
Thank you, Barbara.
Okay. And now I'm just going to introduce Anne because I didn't do it before. Anne Foreman will be our moderator today. I'm so excited to have Anne, who's a member of our experience creation team, and take it forward.
All right. Hello, everyone. So glad that you could join us for this HRSF program, where we're going to be really discussing how do we move from insight to impact. So, the amount of employee and workplace data available just keeps growing, right? Which is very cool, but also, even though it's supposed to make things easier, sometimes it can feel like there's just a lot to sort through. So that's why we're diving in today. We've got some super sharp people analytics folks and HR leaders here, and they're going to help us think about, how do we ask the right questions, test hypotheses, debunk myths, leverage technology, and also AI to really guide our organizations. So all of this is the goal with how do we make our organizations healthier and more productive? If you've been to an HRSF session before and seen a panel, it's going to be a little bit unlike what you've seen before. Today, we're going to have our speakers really show you real world examples, so actual frameworks that they're using and stories of how they have used data to make a difference. And then after each speaker shares, we're going to let the other speakers respond, have a little dialogue. We'll also be taking a question or two from you all, so please do make use of the chat. We want this to be a super interactive session. After the speakers give their mini presentations, we're going to have a breakout moment, and we're going to talk in small groups, find out how you're all using data to drive impact, where you're running into challenges. And then after that, we'll come back and have a focused discussion around the responsible use of AI in HR. So that's going to be really interesting and super fun. So I'm excited for that at the end of the session. So without further ado, let me introduce our wonderful speakers we have with us today. First is Sasha Argenikova. She is the Director of Business Analytics, partnering at Adobe, and she has worked in the healthcare and nonprofit sectors. She has a master's in communication from the University of Arkansas, as well as a PhD from the University of New Mexico, where her doctorate research focused on understanding organizational culture and driving change. Next, we'll hear from Kaval Safdar. She is the Senior Director of People Analytics at Microsoft, where she's helping to democratize insights through intelligent automation. She has held previous people analytics leadership roles at Workday, Palo Alto Networks, and Tesla, and is also on the board of DataPilot. Finally, we're pleased to welcome Dan Casper, the General Manager of Instill AI, where they're building human-centered AI that helps culture, people, and performance thrive. Dan served 6 years in the U.S. Navy and was an explosive specialist with SEAL Team 5. He went on to work at Airbnb and is the former CEO of Wishlist. So we're thrilled to have these experts here with us today to share their knowledge. So please join me in welcoming our first presenter. I'm going to hand it over to Sasha.
Hello, can you all hear me? Okay, fantastic. Great, thank you. James, can we go to the next slide, and I'll start us with a little bit of a story. All right, so imagine a bustling city at dawn. As it awakens, everybody is going about their things that they're working on, and together everyone is contributing to creating this vibrant tapestry of life. And similar to that, in our organizations, all of the employees bring their hopes, their skills, their impact to contribute to collective organizational experience. And with that, humans are complex, organizations are even more complex. So understanding and measuring organizational effectiveness can be quite challenging. And I'll start with a little bit of an example. So imagine an employee named Taylor who joined the organization and had some great skills and great contributions, was thriving initially, was really excited to contribute to collaboration. And then over time, with the changes in organizational structure, some of them a little bit more ambiguous from employee standpoint, with lots of changes in even the direction that the organization is going from that employee point of view. Taylor is no longer as engaged and excited and as productive in the day-to-day work. And that's a typical example of what could happen to an individual in an organization, and just illustrates, again, that complexity of organizational experience. And so if we could go to the next slide, what I wanted to share today with the lens of organizational effectiveness is a bit of a way of thinking about it. So again, as humans are very complex, so is understanding organizational experience. And so here I pulled together a multiple buckets of metrics. So each one of these quadrants is not one metric, but a group of metrics that could be useful in understanding organizational effectiveness. And if we could go to the next slide. The important highlight with all of that is the business context, because in each organization, who the people are, what they're focused on, what is the strategy, and what is the direction the organization is taking, has an important component in understanding org effectiveness. And so as we look at the variety of metrics that could be helpful in understanding org effectiveness, I'd love to share a little bit of a lens of why it's important to HR leaders and organizations. And so imagine, let's take maybe the lens of today's organizational context. So a bit of political uncertainty, a bit of economic uncertainty. Your voluntary attrition is probably low. It's a lot of kind of waiting and seeing what comes next. And so there might be very much a likelihood of sharp strategic pivot, right? It could be a change in the customer base that we're pursuing. It could be change in the go-to-market strategy, et cetera. And so as a strategic HR leader, this lens of organizational effectiveness provides an immense opportunity to come to those strategic conversations with the senior HR, with the senior business team, and to say, what do I bring to the table as a strategic understanding of both strength and then opportunities within my organization? Because people and the complex experience that people in organizations have has an immense impact in the ability of the business to make strategic changes, to pivot to new strategies, to new directions, whether it's whatever the lens is, kind of that people component is immensely important. So I'd love to share that my view is that today, more than ever, looking at org effectiveness in your organizations is immense opportunity, because it will set you apart in being able to lead the strategy on the people side and to be a critical thought partner to the business leaders in helping navigate those changes. And I'll go through a couple of examples. If we could go to the next slide. Here I'm introducing a bit of a lens of what does the HR professional bring? As you take a business problem, right? Maybe it's a change in direction or strategy. Next slide, please. If we take the business problem as well as some of the stories and assumptions, some of the understanding of what we've heard, it might be, again, that lens of employee engagement. It might be, again, the understanding of structures. If we could go through 2 more clicks, I'll have the build here. Yeah, perfect. So as you take that business lens of the business problems, stories and assumptions, and potential decisions and actions that your organization is looking to take, all of these metrics in the bucket of org effectiveness measurement are extremely helpful. So understanding employee sentiment, for example, could give you a good lens of what are some of the strengths about your organization? Is there a big, strong belief in the company strategy? Is it strong belief in leadership? Is there a lot of things that people care about that are a strength? Those things could help you lead the organization through change. If you look at org design and structure, those could be some big opportunities for areas where your organization maybe over time has shifted to a structure in some places that is maybe made sense at the time, but is not as intentional anymore, and so on and so on. So I'll share a couple of examples. I've partnered with a few leaders that really took a look at the org structure and org design as part of understanding their org effectiveness, and then were able to lay out both the short-term approach as well as the long-term strategy, understanding kind of the gaps in the current org design or org structure, whether it's like they're spans of control, you have too many people reporting to one leader, or too many managers with very small team, and over time it just kind of happened, right? Knowing these things allowed them to be guiding the business through change in such a way that those structural deficiencies or inefficiencies get addressed, as well as to create a more of a long-term strategy. And understanding employee sentiment is kind of another lens too. You have both your internal employee sentiment that you can get access to through your employee surveys, but you also have all the external sentiment from places like Glassdoor, et cetera. So again, I feel like now is really the time to take a look at all of those things to understand the org effectiveness. And we could have the next slide. And then together, all this comes to help drive data-driven recommendations and have more impactful data storytelling. Again, as an HR leader, when you're in conversations with business leaders, being able to come with very pragmatic data points to bring into the conversation, it sets those decisions apart. I'll pause here and maybe go to questions. I want to be able to kind of unpack more things that are relevant to the participants here.
Great. Haven't seen any questions yet in the chat on this, but please do everybody chime in if you have some questions here. In the meantime, I will happily ask a question. Sasha, thank you for sharing this framework with us. As you have been using this in your day-to-day, you mentioned looking at the org structure and identifying that this is not something that's going to work for us long term in terms of where we're going. How do you, as the analytics person or the person wearing that hat, in this conversation, how do you really help to bring that data forth to the leaders and partner with them to change the trajectory of where the organization is going?
Yeah, that's a great question, Anne. I think one thing that's really helpful, and again, it goes back to that business problem component. If it's very clear of what problem we're trying to solve, so I'll give you an example. Efficiency is top of mind for a lot of people right now. And so, and it makes sense, right? And so as you take the organizational structure lens and you look at how many layers from the CEO is your kind of employees sit in? Do you have senior directors at multiple layers below who are then so far removed from the top leadership? Are they really able to drive the impact that they need to drive? Do you have, again, teams that have too many managers or senior leaders with too small of the teams where it may not be intentional? And so bringing those pragmatic data points to the conversation has been very impactful, because then we go from the question of we're trying to structure the organization in an efficient manner, and what data points do we have today to say, are we there or not? And then it becomes a conversation from there with a business leader. As I mentioned, with a lot of these things, it doesn't necessarily go to an immediate action. It may be more of a, over time, we want to shift with a different kind of org design and org structure. And at least now we realize that these are the opportunities. And then the other example there is also the return to office and kind of how that impacts the org structure and org effectiveness. So many companies have made hiring during the pandemic in like anywhere hiring. And as many of us are now transitioning to more of like hybrid culture where people are coming to the office more, understanding your org design with the location in mind has also been really helpful, because it starts to expose whether, again, it's intentional. You may have a leader in one location with a team that is totally a different location, right? And what experience does that create, especially as we ask people to come into the office? So those are just a couple of examples.
So we had a question in the chat, Sasha, about what are some examples of assumptions. Maybe we can stick with the return to office for a moment. Yeah. And can you share with us, so in that scenario, what is an example of an assumption you may have made about the org structure as it relates to locations, and how has looking at the data changed, what was actually changed your view of what was actually happening and helped to kind of shift the direction of the structure moving forward?
Yeah, it's absolutely a brilliant question, and I think so important. Leaders have stories, and so many times as leaders tell stories, those are they may or may not be data proven, right? And so a lot of times as HR professionals, we hear those business assumptions or business stories. It may be that, productivity lies at everybody being in the office. And then you take a look at who those everybody are. And if you take a more nuanced approach, like I'm a big advocate for looking at personas, right? Like your employees are not one monolithic group, right? They're very diverse in terms of the type of work they do, where they located, how they engage, whether they are customer facing or not, what type of job they do, who do they collaborate with. And so segmenting your organization into personas, if we take the return to office lens, could shed a lot of light, because like some of the assumptions that I've seen, even in just, articles and posts externally, all over, is the assumption that in-person connection builds innovation, right? And so that may be true for certain personas during certain time, but for others, maybe it adds the additional complexity that they're like why people come into the office, what the office is, where do they come, all of those things are very nuanced. So your assumption with this example could be everybody needs to be in person so that the company is innovative. That is oversimplified. And so when you take a more nuanced like persona approach, you are able to come across with a lot more kind of data proven assumptions and statements.
And the data that you're looking at, is it always hard quantitative data? Or are you also trying to contextualize and, dig deeper through qualitative, fact finding and conversations, or how does that work?
Yeah, and so I think when it comes to people, there's certainly a big element of behavior as well as feelings, right? So a lot of times kind of how people feel about coming to the office again, or how people feel about the strategy that the company is having, et cetera. Those things come through oftentimes in your employee sentiment, that top bucket, in top left bucket. And that could be your, again, survey data. It could be also your external Glassdoor and other sites. And then the behavior data is what people are actually doing. So there is a lot of insight from attrition modeling, for example, understanding what are some of the things that are driving attrition, both in terms of what is happening to the individuals as well as how they feel.
Thank you so much, Sasha. We are going to circle back to you, but now we're going to kind of build on what you have shared here and hand it over to Kaval. I know, Kaval, you have a lot to share with us that kind of also builds on this. I don't think we're going to specifically be talking about the personas, but I know in our kind of preparing conversations for this, you also have personas as part of your research and how you're thinking about things. So, we're excited to hand it over to you now.
Perfect. Thank you. And if we can go to the next slide. Thank you. I wanted to start here before we actually talk about my particular use case and how we've been thinking about insights to impact, etc. And really rooted in this idea of making all decisions based on data, not dogma. And, this particular phrase, if you will, we use it, and perhaps some would say we overuse it, but for us, it's a really important anchor point to say, are you really reacting to a situation with the data that you have on hand? And are there other ways that you could enhance your decision making? And this really was the forcing mechanism for the case study that I'm about to talk about. But I just wanted to lay that foundation of like, yes, as an HR leader, as an analytics practitioner, I love data, certainly. And at Microsoft, we have a culture of actually embracing that data and really looking at the insights before we make decisions. So that leads me to my next slide. And we can just build this out, please. All right, thank you. Okay, so When we started talking about this particular audience and what I wanted to share with you all, I wanted to bring us into this notion of productivity. And Sasha mentioned it really nicely. There is a focus on efficiency. There's a focus on being more data driven. There's a focus on making these decisions based on, again, the best data possible. And at Microsoft in particular, the case study or the reasoning for this was really Satya asking the question of how do we actually think about knowledge worker productivity. And in particular, we honed in on the engineers at Microsoft to really think about their productivity holistically. Now, it would have been easy enough to focus on the right side. So I'll talk about the speed, ease, quality piece a little bit. But we wanted to take as holistic of an approach possible, which meant that we had to really think about the cultural aspect, the environment that our engineers were working within so that they could thrive both from a cultural and environmental perspective and also have products and reduce the friction as far as like getting work done. So if I just anchor you all to the left side of the equation, employee signals thrive. We basically define at Microsoft, we define that as empowered and energized to do meaningful work. It basically comes from that top left box, if you will, that Sasha talked about, which is all around employee sentiment. How are employees actually experiencing Microsoft? And then over on the right side, we have speed, ease, and quality, which means how quickly can I check in code? How easy is it for me to get the resources that I need to actually get my work done? And then quality has aspects in terms of like how many bugs did I see? How many iterations did I have to do to actually be able to like get at what I wanted ultimately to do? The underpinning or the underlying aspect of all of this work are two very, very key things, which are the cultural transformation that Microsoft continues to go through. We're very big on growth mindset. We're very big on experimentation and iteration and learning from our experiences. And then obviously AI as an enabler, because that is the core sort of like fundamental that we're all building up from. Now, this equation can feel pretty overwhelming, especially if it's like, you're looking at data and it's like, I can share a little bit of a detail in terms of like how we looked at the data. But I just wanted to say, start small because you can always build on top of it. It's really important to understand the business problem, like Sasha said. Think about like, how would you actually frame it from a systems point of view? And then just build on that thinking because we definitely at Microsoft didn't get it right the first time. It's definitely a work in progress, and I can share more about how that work is progressing. So if we can go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So over on the right, it's the report that we can talk a little bit about, but I wanted to share more the scope and the extent of what we shared across the different personas. And I love the fact that you mentioned the personas, Sasha. So we have engineering leaders. So we actually put the data back in the hands of the people who are ultimately responsible for it, right? And one of the key questions that I got when we started doing this work at Microsoft was, this is not an HR effort. Why is HR so heavily involved in it? And I would say if it involves your people, everything is an HR effort, right? And it requires that close partnership with the business to be able to say, we're going to figure this out together. So we had 200 plus engineering leaders who now get this report on a quarterly basis. More than 230 HR partners across the different engineering organizations that get this data. And then 11 metrics across speed, ease, quality, employee signals. And 11 can seem like a lot, but I kid you not, we actually started with 50 plus metrics. Engineers love data. And so we had to rock, paper, scissors on some of these metrics to be like, really, these are the most important ones. And I go back to this notion of iterating as well, because these 11, these haven't stayed static. We haven't said, oh, these are the only 11 ones that you will always look at. It's been an ongoing experimentation and iteration as well. And then over on the right, because it's such small text, I just wanted to call out, there are three specific to HR metrics, which I said the employee signals thrive, if you will. That's coming from our sentiment assessment surveys, etc. And then there are things like, what is the NSAT? What is the satisfaction that a developer has from their experience, the systems that they're working in? It has things like focus time, which is basically our assessment of like uninterrupted time to actually do your work, right? So collaboration data obviously is really important for us. And then lots of data in terms of pull requests, so how much time am I spending in the system, etc. And again, like I said, it's constantly evolving because we have to make sure that we're looking at the best data possible. Okay, now we can go to the next slide, please. Perfect. So, and you can build this out, James, please. I didn't realize how much build I had in there. Thank you. So hypothesis testing and myth busting, and I love that somebody put this in chat already of like, our job really is to do myth busting. And Sasha's example was a really great one. So if I just like step through the examples we had some prevalent stories at Microsoft as well. There were notions of like, hey, you're only productive if X, Y, Z conditions exist. And so we had to do the work of actually defining what those hypotheses were, and then really thinking about HR data, certainly, but then incorporating as much of that speedies quality data in there as well. That connection of data really helped us identify trends like, we have particular teams that are really successful despite the fact that they're in different sort of geolocations. But the thing that was in common for all of them was they were in the same time zone. And so for us at Microsoft, it reframed the problem to say, do we need people in the office all the time, or do we need them in the same time zone so that you can actually have ease of collaboration? That also helped us debunk some major myths around productivity and, where people needed to work and how they needed to work and whatnot. But this would have been fine by itself, but then the real impact actually comes from like putting these insights in the hands of the leaders who are making these decisions. And not just the leaders themselves, but also bringing HR along as well, right? Because HR BPs, the folks on this call, I'm sure as well, you are the connection to the leaders, right? And so how do we make sure that you all have the information in the simplest way possible to make sure that we're driving the right decisions, and then making sure that we're enabling policy decisions as well based on the best information possible. So our learnings along the way were, there's a lot of similar groups across Microsoft that could be leveraging the data and looking at like, similar problems. But how do you converge that energy, right? And I'm sure it would be true for all of you across as well, to say, how do we learn from each other rather than feel like we're taking off different pieces and working through those individually? And then business strategy, I love, again, Sasha mentioned it, start with the business problem, because that has to be the key driver of all the work that happens around it. The worst possible thing would be to like, take a really great body of work and somebody says, oh, this is interesting, and then they do nothing with it. So really starting with the business problem on hand. Okay, if we go to the next slide, please. Thank you. Okay, so what does this mean in terms of Microsoft? I wanted to leave you all with this of, we're continuing to work from an adoption perspective. We're continuing to grow our community of folks who can talk about nStrive, who understand it deeply. And then most importantly, actually using the data and insights to drive people and business decisions. This could be, like I said, where teams are located. This could be how we're thinking about particular areas of investment, how we think about code repositories, etc. You name it, everything is fair game. The program continues to evolve. So like I said, we're not done. We're not declaring success. We're continuing to learn and actually employ our growth mindset in this journey. And then last but not least, obviously important for us is like really thinking about how this incorporates in the product as well. And the most important thing that I'll leave you all with is HR has to continue to participate in every phase, right? This isn't just a business initiative or an HR initiative. It has to be that combination, that partnership that needs to exist so that the business outcomes can be the best possible. Okay, that's my thing.
Kaval, this is so insightful. Thank you so much for sharing all these details with us on how Microsoft is approaching this. We did have a question in the chat. This was obviously kind of born out of how do we measure engineering productivity? I think you mentioned that, you know, as you're looking at the personas and also thinking about how might other groups learn from each other, that similar frameworks or versions of this might be being used for other parts of the organization as well. Is that accurate, or
Yep.
how is this being applied more broadly?
Absolutely. And I think if we go to the next slide, because that was a great idea to recap the framework itself. Perfect. So love that question. And the reason why I wanted to bring this up again is you could replace Engineering Thrive with like Recruiter Thrive, for instance, right? The left side still holds employee signals because we really want to think about the culture and the the environmental aspect. And then speed, ease, and quality stays as well. It's just that the data behind these concepts is different from a recruiting perspective. So what we love about this framework is the simplicity, because you can like understand it and sort of like, even if you don't have all the details behind it. What I loved at Microsoft, and I hope this resonates, is there wasn't a challenge in terms of like people buying into the framework. Yes, there was details that had to sit behind it to validate it, but the framework stands. And I mentioned that because speed, ease, and quality, that can mean a lot of different things from a recruiting perspective. So the data behind it can be completely different. But because we have this framework, we can now lift and shift it in a bunch of different places, not just for engineering. It's just that from a business perspective, starting with the most important thing for our CEO, it was actually the focus on engineering.
Awesome. And there are more questions in the chat. I think one of them, Jeffrey, just to let you know, we will kind of dig into AI specifically at the end of this session today. So hold that question, or I will make sure that we circle back to it. But we did have another question from Nick that was building on this question, asking, if you're using tools, which I happen to know that you are, like Microsoft Viva, Engage, and other insights tools like that. So maybe you could just kind of speak to that very briefly before we move to Dan.
Absolutely. Yeah, we obviously, right, like we're Microsoft, we live and breathe our tools. We definitely want to extract the most value and the most juice out of them possible. So this notion of focus time, which is how much uninterrupted time I have to actually work on things like coding, etc., that is from Viva Insights directly. Engage has less of a direct connection to this framework, but we leverage it for other work, especially when we look at sentiment and what people are concerned about. That we have a very holistic view that includes Engage, Insights, and then all of our surveys as well.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Yeah, I was wondering, you had mentioned the focus time, and I was wondering if there was a tie in there when you were mentioning that as part of your metrics. Thank you so much. And we are going to continue building on this conversation. It's kind of a nice segue, actually, that people are wondering about now. How do we take this and continue to dig into those AI insights, right, that you are using at Microsoft? We have Dan Casper here with us, who's going to tell us how his organization is helping others to do this. Dan, are you? There he is. Okay.
Yep, still here.
James. So James, if we could advance 2 slides here, please. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to hand it over to Dan. And again, please keep putting your questions in the chat, everyone.
Awesome. Thanks, Ann. Hi, everyone. Pleasure to be here today. Thanks, HRSF, for having me as well. My name is Dan Casper, calling in from Denver, Colorado, and I'm obsessed with building high-performing teams. I can't get enough of it. Started with my time in the Navy. I was an explosive specialist with the SEAL teams for 7 years. And teams were life and death. In the special operations community, you don't have a $100 million plane, you don't have a $1 billion boat. You just have this group of people, and the culture and the organizational dynamics and the leadership on there is life and death. And so that's something that I can't shake with me even today. Big believer that you could have the best business idea in the world and it's still going to fall short unless you could ignite the power of your people. So I know I'm probably preaching to the choir with everyone here, but super excited to be with a similar mindsets and brains as we talk about the intersection of humanity and technology. That's kind of the concept we'll be discussing over the next few minutes. And my passion also is, how do we utilize the most advanced technology possible to solve the most human problems? And that's what we're going to talk about. How do we use data to optimize things like what Sasha and Kaval were saying, to optimize organizational health and productivity? So my good Dr. James, next slide, please. So my lens today is going to be around how we can leverage AI in our people practices without actually losing the people. And yes, I promise that is a thing we can do. We can use the right AI that is built intentionally to completely unlock human potential that we never thought possible before. We can use technology to make us more cohesive, make us more productive with our teams, and unlock performance that we're just starting to fathom possible. But not all AI is the same. As we know, it's a tech word that people love slapping on. So we're going to unpack, we're going to debunk, demyth that people are talking about in the comments, and we're going to get into how AI can be a superpower if used in the right direction and right way. And I'll be talking a lot about the concept of human-centric AI. How do we use it to take all this unstructured data around people that has been super hard and difficult to access previously and deliver results unlike anything we've ever conceived? Next slide, please. So let's start off with a bang. Culture is the #1 predictor of AI ROI. Stronger cultures equals stronger returns. So the companies that are successfully adopting AI are seeing things like 1.5x higher revenue growth, higher and greater shareholder returns, higher ROI. By 2030, companies that fail to adopt AI may lose up to 40% of their market value. 75% of industries will be dominated by AI-driven companies. So what does all this mean? Well, it means that AI is here and it's changing the game. But through the chaos of kind of this transition, there's also a lot of opportunity, which was mentioned by the other speakers as well. We have this opportunity as people leaders to use this tool and change how strategies are viewed and implemented and even prioritized. And most importantly, this means because of AI, you, the people on this webinar, and people leaders and culture champions have the biggest opportunity to impact business outcomes and performance in teams than ever before, period. Like culture, this is a study from McKinsey that said culture is the #1 predictor of AI success, and AI success equals company success in this new era. So we have an opportunity ahead of us using this technology correctly to really change the game. Next slide, please, James. All right, experiment, close your eyes. Don't worry, I'm not going to take your coffee. I may if I was in person, but think of what your team is going to look like in 5 years. What is on, who is on it? What does it look like? How are you working together? And when I do a similar exercise, I see a word where my team isn't just human, but humans and computers working together to form a collective superintelligence. So what the heck does that mean, Dan? What is in your coffee? What are you talking about? Well, human-centric AI is AI that augments human capabilities, not replaces us. It means that it's ethically aligned, it respects privacy, autonomy, it's context-aware, it understands the nuances of human behavior, it's transparent, it's trustworthy, it's collaborative, and enables better human decision-making. And the concept of superintelligence is one that we're able actually to work more in our zone of genius, with computers helping us to be better at our craft and execute tasks that are outside of our zone of genius. And believe it or not, you may already be using some of this human-computer teaming in your works already. Next slide, please, James. So if we look at things like Duolingo, if you've ever used the app to help you be better at French or Italian, they actually change their courses that they're recommended based upon how you're interacting with the tool. Same thing with Apple. They start to get to biometric footprint on you. They'll send you alerts if your heart goes into arrhythmia. Same thing with Grammarly. It helps you speak better, to interact and communicate. Even Waze will start to use AI algorithms to help you get to places faster. So at Instill, we built the first human capital management large language model. So think of it as having access to all the best culture practitioners in the world who know as much about your team and your culture as you do. So these AI models become then the DNA of which we layer in unique data for each company we're working with. So that unique data just happens to be the gold mine of culture data, and that's team communication data. That is the corpus of the data that we're looking at. And we look at how teams are communicating to give real-time insights on your culture and team performance and productivity. And here's what that allows us to achieve. Next slide. So this comes to life in a couple of different examples. So the view on the left is a screenshot of a tool we built called Instill Flow. It's an AI companion that joins your meetings and looks at how you're communicating as a team to give you live scores and sentiment on your culture vital signs, things like psychological safety, trust, innovation, inclusion. We even look at meeting hygiene, which is specifically how we're looking at productivity from a team communications lens. So we look at things like, hey, was there an agenda in your meeting? Were there decisions made? How was time managed? Did we complete the items on the agenda? And when there are clear decisions and next steps? So this report is actually just for each individual, but gets aggregated so companies can actually see real-time data on their culture and their team productivity as it's happening in the moment. And then the screenshot on the right, you'll see our framework we call Instill Culture Vital Signs, which we measure company values alignment. We can see how different your values are showing up within your organization, not just as they sit on the wall, and even allow space for each company to measure anything that's top of mind, all within communication data in real time. Next slide, please. So we can chat a little bit about a case study from Instill in the Wild. We were working with a marketing firm out of Chicago this spring. They had a challenge because they faced low participation in assessments. And by the time they collected all this data, that major issue had already passed and the ship had sailed, and it was greatly impacting their innovation, which for a marketing company is a big deal. So we implemented our program called Instill Flow, which provides real-time data and culture analytics and gives recommendations on how to improve as they communicate. And within about 2 weeks, we were able to identify the root cause, which is a lack of psychological safety and untrained managers. And from that, we are able to give recommendations to how do we improve this psychological safety, which we know is a precursor to innovation. And we saw a 27% increase in innovation and 44% improvement in psychological safety within 60 days. So it's pretty cool to see this actually unlock change in such a quick, rapid environment. Next slide, please. So that's kind of the concept of what we wanted to discuss today, is like, how do we actually bring AI into our people tools and still make it human-centric? Because we know culture is the #1 predictor of AI success, and AI is the key to unlocking performance. Then the bottom line is human-centric AI can be the new lever. So it's up to us to not be on the lagging end of this, but how do we think of human-computer teaming? How do we assess and understand if the AI is human-centric, and how do we use it not to replace us as humans, but to truly understand and augment our experience together? Cool. So we have some questions, and do you want me to jump right into those?
Yes, please. Yeah, if you're seeing those, please jump in. I think we definitely want to understand a little bit more about how you're assessing psychological safety. I know you've worked with a lot of researchers that have all fed into this model, but perhaps you could share a little bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So Jeffrey, great question. So 3 things are very important to us. Transparency is very key. Value, so designing tools that aren't just, oh, my CEO makes me add these types of tools, but how do we help each individual level up themselves? And of course, data security and privacy. So it's not so much monitoring. Think of like having a coach in all of your calls at scale, or one of the world-class culture facilitators. So that's really the concept that we're trying to get into. It's not just to monitor, but essentially we're there to help you get better and understand in real time. Just do it at scale. How do we tease out behavioral signals? So we actually worked with several different research institutions before we wrote a single line of code: Berkeley, Stanford, Caltech, US Army Research Lab, to understand how culture is shifting and how do we build AI models that essentially understand human behavior as we do, and then are able to build those models. So we're not just putting wrappers on GPT. The sophistication of the models that we've been working with is designed to understand human behaviors. And that's one of the big deltas for us. So we have a couple of white papers out there. We have each dimension that we have. So psychological safety has 5 to 7 different trigger elements. And like humans, if we were in a call, so things like vulnerability are really key to psychological safety. So if a leader or manager sailed a time that they failed or messed up, or if people take ownership, that would be a positive scoring element to psychological safety. So really the beauty of the tools that we're building is not this huge, long kind of, it's really, we just look at how humans understand these pieces, and then we teach models to essentially replicate as well. Hopefully, Matthew, that got a little bit to how you're doing your question as well. How does the AI measure nonverbal behaviors? We're actually building that right now. We went to market with the concept of not doing it because we thought people would be a little bit creeped out about this. It's one of the most #1 things requested for us. In fact, and that's again, because we know nonverbals play a big part of human interaction as well. So if I were to pick up my phone, start scrolling, my team's gonna like, dude, what you doing? Like, this is impacting my trust. I was about to present to you. So being able to look at that and have optionality is definitely something that we're building in the marketplace right now, where there's a couple of great partners out there, one of which does the tools for Tesla and their kind of body kind of visualization to making sure you're not just sleeping at the wheel. So there's some phenomenal tools out there that help us bring this to life in a way that, again, helps to understand all elements of human connection.
Dan, how do you think about, I'm sure most people on the call have participated in or facilitated and designed an employee engagement survey in the past. This is kind of a different version where it's actually happening in the flow. How do you think about, what can be unlocked by really getting that data real time versus kind of doing it at the regular intervals that most of us might be used to?
Yeah, and kind of if we've looked at employee engagement surveys, which we've all done, we've been a part of, it takes months to do. A lot of times the people in this call are the ones that have to own it, make sure everyone follows up and does it. What we saw from the research too is like people game the system, like click through it super fast. There's a delta between self-reported behaviors and actual behaviors, low participation rates. And then by the time we get the data, we aggregate it. The culture has changed. That environment changes. Like our culture is a living organism. It lives and breathes and ebbs and flows because of how multivariate our environment is. Like Sasha and Kaval said, like we're talking to a team in Japan and it's in engineering and sales. Like this is live culture in our new environment. And so the tools that we've used in the past may not fully capturing that. And so if we're able to calibrate real time, hey, you just came out of a meeting and your psych safety dropped quickly. Oh, cool. Then I can get a recommendation. I can fix it before waiting 6 months and I'm completely off the path. So we think it's a tremendous opportunity to, again, leverage unstructured data around people. Now, we still believe in assessments. In fact, what we see some of the greatest results is using both in parallel. A company that we just launched with, they did an assessment and they ran in some of our communication tools. They had really high trust scores in the surveys and very low in reported. So it actually gave us a very surgical place to start work with them, and it accelerated some of our work together too. So we're not saying all assessments are bad. We're still a believer, but in today's environment, we also know that takes different tools that may not have been possible for to truly understand and make an impact that we want.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. And I'm going to take a question. I know, Sasha, you have your hand up. If you wouldn't mind, James, getting Sasha back up on screen for us.
Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to chime in and kind of build on what Dan started to talk about. I think, again, like there's behavior, which is what he's talking about, measurement, like your what is happening in the room, but there's also the feelings, right, of how people feel. And so I think it's like really understanding what is the right tool for the right question you have. And back to the question about psychological safety, right? Like there's proven measures of like there's sometimes you may not feel psychologically safe, but it may not be visible in the meeting that is being measured, right? And so I do feel like it's an and, but it's also understanding what is the right tool for measuring things. And then certainly like when you have a very well done employee survey, it will give you a wealth of data. And in a lot of companies that, including Microsoft and Adobe, where we have robust listening strategy, robust, like there's data scientists that are focused on analysis of the employee engagement surveys, you're able to go a long way in answering very important questions, very complex questions with the sentiment data by asking the right questions and getting to like how people feel, where they're uncertain, and actually being able to use that to predict the behavior that maybe is not happening yet in the organization. So I think it's that nuance of understanding what tool for what question.
Such a great point, Sasha. I mean, to give all employees that safe space where they can share their feelings and really be honest about how they see, things coming to life in the day-to-day for them and share their experience is really invaluable in understanding, what are we trying to get to with this data and what tools can we use to get there. Thank you for that. James, if we can go to the next slide, please. We're going to introduce our breakout sessions so we can continue this question in small groups. So in just a moment here, you're going to be placed automatically. There's nothing you need to do except for hit join into a breakout room. And we're going to ask you to introduce yourselves to each other, Do choose a spokesperson that's kind of taking extra note of what the conversation is, just so that, if we do have a few minutes, they can share what that conversation was back with the rest of us. But a couple of questions to kind of get you started here is just share with the group, what are you already doing within your organization to use data and drive impact? So just kind of where are you right now? Are you using it? Are you not? What challenges are you running into? And then if there are any kind of takeaways or aha moments that you've had from listening to our speakers, please, share those with your group. And then also think about what's one question your group has that you really want answered by these speakers. We've got experts here, and we want to make sure we're taking advantage of all the wealth of knowledge they have to share with us. And we can also incorporate just really what's top of mind for you. So I think with that, we are ready to go into our breakouts. These are very informal. They'll be fun. I know some people see breakout and they're like, but it's going to be a great time, just very low key. And then when we come back again, there's going to be also that discussion about AI, responsible use of AI in HR. So we're excited for the next part of the session. All right, James, we are ready. Just go ahead and click join if you have not already. All right, I'm going to join mine. I'll see y'all on the flip side.
Kelsey, are you here? I know we can get distracted. Kelsey, Michael Acevedo, are you here?
In way. Okay.
We'll
So
just have to repeat all of that so that it
Yeah.
gets captured in the recording.
start small. That's my recommendation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I agree with both. I would also say back to the framework that I introduced was like start with the business question, right? Like very basic, because that will unlock the path of where it gets started, whether you have a lot of data or the assumption that there's very little data. I'm still convinced that if you have an HRIS, that's already a fantastic start, right? It's not tracked in Excel or manually somewhere. That you could get the right data points. With some metrics, sometimes it's not available today, but it's something that you would drive the organization to start collecting or start tracking or defining new metrics. There have been a handful metrics in my career that were kind of created in the organization when the need emerged, like either a metric or a framework or a way of measuring some human behavior component. And so definitely start small, start with the business question and business problem. I would also say think through what action you will take, because that will determine what metrics you would take a look at. Because if the action is creating a program like for the organization, that's very different than restructuring the organization. And that will dictate what data points you could take a look at to get you started.
Mm-hmm. I'm also thinking, Kaval, you had mentioned that you started with 53 metrics in that Engineering
Right.
Thrive
Yep.
framework, and then whittled down to 11. Just that's kind of emblematic of how much data is available sometimes within an organization. How did you even think about which ones really were the most impactful metrics to be looking at for your framework?
Yeah, so we had a couple of different lenses to ultimately what landed on this scorecard or framework, if you will. First things first was, is there enough data coverage across the 200 plus systems that we have at Microsoft? And that was important because we wanted to make sure that everybody had a common language in terms of like how to think about productivity, and particularly engineering productivity. So that coverage of data was important. The second thing was, if you can't like explain it in 10 seconds, then let's like put it aside because simplicity was really important. Already we were dealing with a very complex problem. We didn't want to add more complexity to it by introducing like 50 plus metrics that were like really, really difficult to get at and then also super complex to explain. And then the third thing which really helped us make the decision was these were metrics that were not derivatives of another metric, right? Like we wanted these metrics to sort of stand alone by themselves and measure each of those components that we were interested in, rather than feel like, we could actually back into these metrics a different way or something like that. And then I will say, like, this had nothing to do with the decision-making process, but the important thing was we had very close partnerships with our engineering partners so that when I presented a recommendation, it wasn't immediately sort of like pushed aside of like, oh, this is just HR's point of view, or this is just the people analytics person feeling like they need to tell me how to look at my data. And that partnership like took us a while to build, right? This wasn't me just showing up to a random meeting and, having this conversation. So I will say again that those partnerships are so important. So you're not like sitting in your, office somewhere trying to figure this out. This does require a close partnership, close conversations with the stakeholders as well.
Great. Thank you so much for that. We also have a question here from one of the other groups saying that their group talked a lot about the challenges and opportunities based on company size, and that the responsibility is high for HR leaders to be clear about the intention and desired outcomes, which plays perfectly into the conversation actually that we just had. Any further comments on that? And then anybody else who's kind of the spokesperson of your group, can you share maybe a question that you might have had that your group came up with in your groups? I have more questions from my group. We came up with a lot of questions. One of them, Kaval, is for you. We're thinking about this whole, as you kind of already mentioned, right? We have to figure out what are the metrics that we are going to use that are not derivative of others, but some of them like ease. There was a question about how is ease really measured, and is this a self-reporting measure, which sometimes needs to be taken with a grain of salt, or is it really looking at all of the systems that are in place and thinking about how easily things are going from one to the other? Can you just share a little bit about when you have a metric like that, how do you actually measure it?
Yep. Yes, it's a combination of self-reported, which we find to be pretty accurate in terms of just the actual sort of like outcome that we're looking at. And it's looked at. So we have these quarterly surveys that we actually ask our engineers how satisfied they are with the engineering systems. And that's been really important for us because that's been indicative then of also other outcomes that we're interested in. And we find those, like I said, to be very, very accurate. So more of our older systems tend to have a little bit more ease, if you will, because they're more established. And then, the newer ones, we're still working through them. So that's the self-reported piece. And then it's also things like downtime, system downtime, right? Like if you actually see systems that continue to have higher downtime, then the ease tends to be on the lower side. And again, it gives us that opportunity to be able to remove that friction, if you will, from the system in terms of like actually getting that information. I'll tell you, and this ties into the new role that I'm in, the space that I'm in terms of like thinking about people analytics in the context of technology, not, or going beyond traditional consulting. Our definition of ease is how easily can an analyst actually extract data from the system and go from insights to impact in a matter of minutes and not days or weeks, right? So again, I'm using that as an example of like, regardless of what role you're in, what your immediate context is, you can actually think about ease in your context as well.
Great. Thank you so much for that. And now I think, James, if you don't mind putting up the next slide in our presentation and the poll. What we're going to do here, everyone, is shift into this responsible AI and HR conversation. And we're going to start that off by asking you all, as you think about the use of AI in HR, which of the following do you believe are the biggest challenge or concern as you're thinking about perhaps implementing it within your organization or one of your clients' organizations? You know, kind of what's top of mind for you. We're going to see how everybody votes, and then we're going to ask our panelists to really weigh in on those top two, the top two topics here as voted by you. Okay, coming in. I will say, just while everybody's voting, and I'll give you, you know, a couple more seconds to vote. Dan, we had a lot of discussion in our group about, you know, how Instill is taking the information that it's getting, kind of where does it go into whom. So, you know, at some point here, I'd love for you to just kind of circle back on that as well. So you can share a little bit about, you know, the way that those insights are helping individuals to kind of change the way that they're behaving within some meetings and be really constructive. Okay, I think we're good here. We've got 90% participation, which we'll call a win here. Number one looks like data privacy and security. And then number two is the role of human judgment. So starting with data privacy and security, you know, what kind of insights can you share with us, speakers, as we think, how should we think about data privacy and security when it comes to AI and HR?
Yeah, I can kick us off because that's a topic that I'm very passionate about. And also, I think we had a question earlier on about navigating the journey of kind of using AI for HR type of analysis and HR type of questions, but in a way that is ethical, basically using this data in the right way. And so I think when it comes to using people data, the privacy component is very important because it's whether it's sentiment data, whether it's behavior data. I have very close partnership with our privacy team, and kind of it's a quick phone call away to just say, here's what we're thinking, here's what the data points are involved. A lot of times with regard to using AI for analysis of human data, it's getting the permission from those participants whose data that is to use this data in this way. And so a lot of times if it's say sentiment data, as part of the survey, there is a privacy statement that tells individuals that this data will be used for analysis using certain tools. This is kind of how it will be using. And so individuals essentially, when they go and fill out the survey, they know how this data is used. So that kind of transparency is very important. And then security element is also pretty critical. I think early on as ChatGPT rolled out and got a lot of attention, people were going in and putting questions directly in the ChatGPT platform and putting some internal context that really shouldn't be getting there. And so I think very important for HR application of AI specifically, we are stewards of extremely sensitive data on the people side. And a lot of times in this data, there could be also company PI as well as IP that's coming through in, say, comments from employees, et cetera. So certainly making sure that the security infrastructure is set up. It's a licensed product for your particular organization. It's either set behind your firewall or you have a separate instance of whatever tool you're using, and that it clearly states that it could be used with confidential data or with sensitive data within your organization. So I think those elements are extremely important.
Thank you for that. Oh, yes.
Yeah, I was just going to say +1 to everything Sasha said already. And data privacy and security, yes, we're talking about it in the context of AI. And even before that, right? Before you even implement AI, there is that lens that has to stay in terms of privacy and security. And I was just sharing with my group, so at Microsoft, our surveys tend to be confidential, not anonymous. And the reason why employees have placed their trust in us is really because we've made sure that we have very, very tight privacy controls. And we make sure that, as Sasha said, they understand the statements, they understand how the data can be utilized, and that the data is treated in the most secure way possible. So I would definitely think about it outside of the responsible AI context as well.
Dan, anything else to add from your lens?
Just to underline the how matters. The how very much matters, and how we're building and thinking and utilizing AI. So these are the right questions that need to be asked. Like, we don't want to rush into these tools, but if they're done correctly. So, you know, how the models are trained, I think is super important to eliminate bias and making sure it's not a singular perspective on the recommendations and data that we're looking at. You have to be able to trust it. So data security and privacy, is it encrypted? Is it GDPR compliant? Who owns the data? Are your company information training the models, or is that yours? And then human touch points, I think, are still super critical, specifically in human-centric AI. Beth from Headspace was in our group, and she talked about the importance of that too. Like, these human touch points are so critical for us. We can use, you know, AI to do the heavy lifting, but then how do we have those sanity checks at the right moment to keep humans in the loop and making sure that we're still involved in the process and the right one? So I think those three elements are super critical in addition to the other two.
Well, that was the exact second topic that was the most important one, which is like the role of human judgment. So we're getting all of these insights from AI. What role should humans play kind of going forward? And how do we, you know, what does it mean to have a human in the loop? How do we think about that? If you all could kind of share some thoughts there. Maybe Sasha, do you have a...
Sure, yeah. I was hesitant to jump first because I always do. So, but I think when it comes to, so first of all, maybe let's unpack what human in the loop means, right? Without AI, typically in HR, there is the human who makes the decision. But when you introduce AI, how AI is introduced? Is it kind of bringing the data points, simplifying the workflow, and enabling the human to make the decision? Is it transparent, or is it something that we are looking to automate a decision that is traditionally done by a human? And especially in HR, there is a set of decisions that impact employee, whether it's hiring, whether it's promotion, whether it's selection criteria for certain programs that are given opportunities to individuals. And so or pay is another very important element. When it comes to those very important decisions from people's standpoint, making sure that it's not an automated workflow where AI is doing all the parts, but there is that human that comes in and assesses the inputs. I think it's also the transparency of how the algorithm works to get to the output. There is a lot of, typically with HR applications, there's a lot of testing for bias. You take, you know, your output of individual and seeing how does that compare to the input to see if there is somehow something in the algorithm that produces a systematic bias. And AI or not, like, this should be something that is baked into the processes, whether it's human judgment that is making it or AI that is contributing it to. So those are some of those very important considerations. And for a lot of companies who are early adopters of AI, I think sometimes it could limit the progress because you start with something that is very complex, and then it kind of gets everybody really frustrated and maybe not as much of a win and a benefit because it's very complex. So I think my point of view there is, like, as much as starting with less complex, very straightforward applications of AI where it's not going into a component where it's impacting a very critical human decision to an individual in an organization, simple interview scheduling or something like that that's a bit more transactional than something that fits into a very important decision for the individual. I know Kaval has thoughts on the human in the loop as well.
Just a few thoughts. I think the biggest thing that I'm realizing in the work that we're doing is certainly there's an aspect of like lower hanging fruit, right? Like the transactional stuff. From an analytics perspective or HR, it is the transactional stuff. So how can I streamline auditing, for instance, that, an agent should be able to do for me easy enough, and I don't really need the humans in the loop for that. Where it comes to the judgment aspect, that's where things get really, really interesting, right? Because when we talk about like AI and making sure that there's a human in the loop, there's almost this underlying assumption that the human is going to make a better decision than AI will. And I think that's an assumption worth challenging, right? If like really are we seeing the outcomes in that way? And so that's what we think about routinely as well, of like, how do we actually create the right sort of experiences for people so that they can get the right information. But we also do that validation, if you will, of like when the human makes the decision versus like where AI makes the decision, right? Because there's a counterbalance that's needed. And I think it comes down to building the habit as well, right? In our group, we were talking about, somebody's got, I think it was Doris, they've got Copilot at work now. And so how do you interact with it on a daily basis, whether that's Copilot, Gemini, whatever, your flavor. How do you build that habit? Because the more demystifying that happens in AI, the easier it becomes to like actually engage and make sure that you're trying it out in safer spaces. And huge plus one, definitely don't jump into the hiring and the talent decisions, etc., with AI, because that is something that is continuing to evolve, and technology is just going to get better and better. But ultimately, it's the humans that are responsible, right, for the decision making. And so, how do you use AI as that way of enhancing the decision rather than like handing over the decision completely to AI?
James, I wonder if we can re-share the slides for a moment. Dan had put together just a few other slides on this specifically to kind of help frame our thinking around it. Dan, can I hand this over to you to take us through these quickly?
Yeah, 100%. So a couple of rapid fire kind of note taker, we can share this with the crew, but a couple of things is one, here's a flight plan to actually adopt some AI. And one of the biggest things, and we talked about this in my group too, that I see organizations make is like, oh, we need to adopt AI. And they just start grabbing whatever tools just say AI in it. And like, hey, it's going to fail. Like, no, good luck out there. But at the end of the day, like how we successfully adopt it is actually ID some business problems. What is the question? What is the framing? What issue strategically are we looking to solve? Cool. Then now we know, again, that end state. And the next piece is where can AI fit in that workflow to automate some of the things we're doing, provide us additional data to support agentic workflows and kind of remove some of the low-hanging fruits and easier things that we don't need to have humans make the decision. Like, let's work on our zone of genius. I think another piece too is like getting culture involved. Like, we know that your company culture is the #1 predictor to AI adoption. So is your team, does it have the growth mindset? Are we rolling this out and just saying, okay, we're using AI and not actually supporting it? Are we incentivizing the right behaviors? Are we, kind of showing people and bringing along on the journey? So that's super important. Again, we're people leaders, we're culture champions. We know that culture matters in this, so we need to roll this out intentionally as well. And then evaluate your tools. We were just talking about this, but like data security and privacy, how are the models being trained? We need to ask these questions instead of just implementing any old AI and assuming it's going to work. And the last piece is too is just don't, once it's in, a lot of times like, okay, it's AI, it's going to go forth and conquer, and we just have to sit back and sip our coffee. Like, we need to have somebody own the tool. We need to create a feedback loop. It needs to have that internal champion too, to making sure that it's utilized. So a couple of rapid fire things for us to think about that we put together as the presenters is like, how do we have the right flight plan in place to making sure we're not just shooting from the hip, but being surgical in the ways that we're adopting new technologies.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that with us. Would you mind also answering the question that I sort of teased a little bit earlier of what does Instill do in these moments where you are collecting data on individuals, in their meetings? Where does that go and what happens after?
Yes. So think of us as a Jiminy Cricket on your shoulders. The Jiminy Cricket is just yours. It's not anyone else's. We don't blast the data to your manager. We don't send it to your CEO. So the reports and data that you're getting on your interactions on culture are just for you. They're meant to be like a coach, your own executive coach at scale. However, we do aggregate the information. So we anonymize it. We can't filter down into a certain level of groups. So we can't say, oh, that Dan guy, he's the psychological safety guy. Now, caveat that we are getting pulled from the market. So it's interesting dynamic because organizations want to be able to filter down, but at the end of the day, we have to trust the tools or they're going to flop on their face. So we're taking a stance on that as an organization. And again, just something that it is interesting, all the different variables that place in here. So the individual information is yours. It's meant to help you get better at your craft, to perform better, to think better, to elevate your team better. We show aggregate information because then we want leaders at your organization to be able to make relevant decisions to help bring their team along on the right information. So I think it's a complex environment. It's one that I think organizations are taking stances on. Others are showing everything, but we're trust is super important to us. Value is super important to us. Data security is important to us. But also we know that culture is a team sport, and so it should not just be a tool for the executives that gives people you're next and you're fired next, but how do we actually empower people to help them do their best work? And that's the goal of the tool.
Awesome. And then as you all are thinking about ownership of these tools within your organizations, we have a question here from Mike asking, should we have a single owner, or how do we kind of develop a point of view as an organization and then empower multiple owners and departments for different programs?
I can jump in and get us started and then turn over to Cole and Dan. I've been part of several different groups that are gathering around the topic of AI adoption in the organization, and there is no one size fits all. It's highly contextual. I think a lot of organizations have more of a AI governance team or AI adoption council that brings leaders from various parts of the organization. And the advantage of that model allows for really not a one size fits all adoption or strategy, but really the perspective of practitioners on the ground, the individuals in the organization who know the work well, as well as who know their internal employees well in that particular department. That's the model that we use currently at Adobe, is having a group of individuals coming together. There is folks from each department, so to speak, that brings together kind of their perspective and driving the adoption in their organization, as well as sharing best practices and learnings to allow the organization to kind of scale together. I think the other thing that I'm very proud of seeing kind of how it unfolds and seeing a lot of positive momentum is that our talent development team is actually driving the enablement of AI for the entire organization, which is, again, shout out to fellow L&D professionals there. But I think it's like, instead of having an approach where more technical team driving the adoption with people, we have the talent development team who knows the employee base very well and knows how to motivate and engage them. And the last thing is we use a persona approach, meaning that depending on who you are in terms of the work that you do, as well as where you are in terms of your hesitancy or eagerness with AI adoption, you will get a different type of engagement or offerings.
Thank you for that. I think it was a really interesting cross with Elizabeth's note here in the chat, which is that Moderna just announced the CPO is also going to be leading kind of what is the role of AI within the organization going forward. So very, very interesting and timely to see more HR leaders tapped with being responsible for all of this work, and how are we implementing it? How are we using it with our talent, and using it ethically? I am going to have to now hand it over to Barbara to close us out here. But first, I want to thank the three of you. You really have brought such insights to this session today. Thank you for your preparation, making the slides and bringing your case studies and frameworks, and then engaging with all of us. And for, of course, all the participants here, we really appreciate all of the engagement that we've had from you all here today. All right, so James, I'm going to hand it back over to Barbara. You're on.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Anne. And I want to thank you for moderating this and driving such a great panel of experts in this area. And I'm sure we could carry on this conversation for another few hours as we dig into it. So let me just say that please join us on LinkedIn. We'll continue the conversation. And we are also providing new forums as they come up, and we see key strategic issues. AI obviously is a key one that we just had a lunch and learn about, where we got together just practitioners on how to use AI and what the implications are. Maybe we'll do another one. We'll let all of you know. All the slides will be packaged together, and you'll get an email from us in the next week. If you're a member, you get access to the recorded conversation and our past recorded conversations together on our Zoom meetings. So we encourage you to become members if you're not already. James, you want to go to the next slide? And this year, we've run our programs under the theme of HR leadership in a multi-factor turbulent world. Our next two programs, the next one will be in September. It'll be in person, place to be decided yet, focusing on building workforce resilience in this turbulence that we're all experiencing. And in November, we'll have another Zoom one focused on how to create healthy workplaces in a very volatile economy. So please join us for that. Next slide. Here's more on membership. We encourage you to join us, and when you join us, you get to bring a free guest. So next slide. And we really want your feedback and thoughts on this program and any future topics that you're interested in that allow us to continue our focus on strategic leadership in this turbulent environment. And I think the last slide, we want to thank you all for joining us. It's been a great conversation. I know we have a lot more to talk about, so please keep in touch with us. Join us on LinkedIn and follow us on LinkedIn and join our membership team. Again, HRSF is a all volunteer organization. If you'd like to be more involved, please reach out to me, Anne, Steph, anyone on our team, and we'd love to get you more involved. Have a good day, have a good rest of your week, and we hope to see you at our next event. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.